What is order? This question underscores any inquiry into the nature of the American justice system. In Kelling and Wilson's seminal article, The Piece That Led to the Creation of the Broken Windows Policing Model That Has Become Standard Across the Country, order is a central concept whose most important complexities are left unacknowledged. Let's ask another question. What are the police for? Kelling and Wilson say their true purpose is order maintenance. It is an historical accident that they acquired anti crime law enforcement powers. And according to the authors, this focus on criminals hampers their ability to build relationships with citizens. Now, the broken windows theory of policing rests on a simple analogy. If one window in a building is broken and left unrepaired, pretty soon all of the other windows will be broken too. This is an analogy about order. A well ordered community presents itself as such. Its tidiness and regularity expresses the fact that this is a community in which people follow the rules. So, an orderly neighborhood is a neighborhood governed by a set of informal rules. These rules are known to everyone and they are enforced by residents. To the extent that the members of a community feel safe and justified in correcting unacceptable behavior, a community has a self regulating order. This order is primarily enforced by residents, with the police providing auxiliary support. In this neighborhood, all of the windows are intact. Someone with a brick and good aim might think twice. People may be watching on the other side of those windows. This is the form of order that broken windows policing supposedly aims to either preserve where it exists or create where it does not. Because once those rules start to decay, when they go unenforced or unrepaired, disorder becomes visible. This is an important point for our authors. They conceive of order as a function produced by the workings of a system of social control, in much the same way that our body's various systems, circulatory, muscular, nervous, and so on, work together to produce a functioning human being. So when even small parts of the system fail to work correctly, they set off chain reactions of greater and greater malfunction. Hence, any piece of abandoned or uncared for property that is defaced or stripped invites further harm to and disrespect for property. As physical disorder manifests in the form of unlit and poorly kept buildings and streets, the disorderly people our authors are so concerned with naturally congregate in places that advertise themselves as lawless. Notice the author's phrasing here. These disreputable people are not necessarily criminals, but they are described as unpredictable or obstreperous. This definition is notably ambiguous. It stretches to describe not just drunks and rambunctious groups of kids, but panhandlers, sex workers, and drug addicts. That is, the category of so called disreputable people includes people whose desperation is in itself disorderly. The visible presence of panhandlers and prostitutes is seen here as evidence of a kind of cultural decay, a failure of a community to enforce its own rules and so allow disorder to grow. Now, the authors do not pause to wonder whether the presence of these people indicates, say, the decay of an economic system and the social order on which it is based. As we have discussed, the urban crime wave that emerged in the 1960s, that our authors are responding to by the early 80s, was rooted in communities that had suffered the first effects of deindustrialization. The breakdown of economic order, the rise of poverty and want and precarity, is certainly a relevant factor in explaining the rise of visible disorder. Now, one reason questions of economic and social order don't appear relevant to our authors is because their main argument is that the prevalence of disorder over order reflects a cultural or a moral problem. That is, if order is maintained by a willingness of individuals to assert their right to police their community, secure in the knowledge they'll be backed up by their neighbors, then the failure to do this is basically a failure of individual will. If people allow themselves to be governed by fear or timidity, they are effectively abandoning their duty to maintain order and offloading that responsibility entirely to the police. The authors claim that this puts too much pressure on police forces unsuited to this work. But more importantly, they wish to make the argument that this situation can be avoided by a socially enforced refusal to tolerate disorderly behavior. In effect, this is an argument against the social trends of the 1960s and 1970s, which saw the civil rights movement, hippie counterculture, and student protest movements systematically disrupt certain notions of public order to pursue a new and seemingly threatening order. This perhaps helps to explain why even the authors admit that their theory has no obvious mechanism for preventing broken windows from creating a kind of institutionalized bigotry. Since the authors assert that police alone cannot do the job of maintaining order, the community must do most of the self policing work itself. But this extends to an argument that says the police should defer to neighborhood standards as a surer means of maintaining order than a rigorous application of the rules of the state. But if a well ordered community is one that relies on enforcing its own rules, what are the acceptable limits to those rules? What about a neighborhood that treats disorderly person as a synonym for black or gay or immigrant? What about a neighborhood whose internal standards run counter to either the letter of the law or the sensibilities of the police working in that community? This is a complex question. On the one hand, the potential for abuse is clear, but on the other hand, this sort of local, self regulating community control is an indispensable feature of genuine democracy. This is in part a conflict over the meaning of order itself. Our authors take the word order to be fairly uncomplicated. People want to feel safe from violence, they want to feel safe from harassment, and they want their neighborhood to look like a place where violence and harassment are unwelcome. But it is by no means obvious that these virtually universal human desires for security exhausts the meaning of the word order. The fundamental problem is that when it comes to broken windows, order is treated as an abstract state of harmony. But all orders that have existed, do exist, and will exist are products of history, products of complex and unpredictable developments that cannot be understood at a purely abstract level. A helpful way for thinking about the complexities of order is found in the work of the French philosopher Jacques Rancière. Rancière has a concept that is often translated as the distribution of the sensible. He argues that the police, as an idea and as an actual body of people, exists to enforce a certain distribution of the sensible. Now, this is a not very clear way of saying that while we human beings interpret the world through the evidence of our five senses, there are plenty of things out there in the social world that go unnoticed by those same senses. Let's focus on the sense of sight, how one sees the world. Rancière is thinking of sight both in terms of the biological reality of what we see when light strikes our retinas and nerves sends that information to the brain, but also in terms of the social reality of what facts of life we are encouraged to see clearly and which facts of life are blurred or hidden altogether. What we call order is in fact a particular division of the world into those things which can be seen or otherwise sensed, and those things which cannot. Take our author's notion of undesirable people. A neighborhood is well ordered if these sorts of people are simply not seen in day to day life. But this does not mean that they don't exist. The drunks and addicts and prostitutes, the desperate individuals on the margins of the social order, are supposed to go unseen. They have no productive role to play in society. Instead, their visibility becomes a symptom of disorder and of possible chaos. Hence, preserving order requires rendering these people invisible. So we should think through just what is meant by the concept of order. We should ask ourselves whose order, defined in what way, aimed at securing whose best interests. The more we do this, the more we come to see how differing and often incompatible visions of order collide with one another in the day to day reality of American life.